So in a few minutes, we're going to review some of the practices that we're taking on for this Advent season. But first, we have all kinds of good things for us to consider for today. So for today, we begin by turning to the scripture passage that we've just heard. Thank you, Sarah, for reading that for us. So we're turning to the very beginning of Mark's gospel, which just the first 8 verses of that. So it's interesting. I mean, maybe you've noticed, named before, how Mark doesn't mess around with any baby Jesus at all, right? Mark has no inclusion of the birth narrative of Jesus. So Mark he starts Jesus already an adult. And so Jesus is about to show up on the scene and begin his ministry where we start. And before he shows up, though, we meet crazy, wearing a camel hair habit, tied at the waist with a leather belt, eating locusts and wild field honey, John the Baptist, this wild card guy. And he's there, and we heard the prophet Isaiah quoted as well. John's there fulfilling this prophecy, getting people ready to receive the message in the life of Jesus. So if you're someone who has been in the church for any part of your life, then you have likely heard of and maybe know a little bit about John the Baptist, and even this passage in particular may be familiar to you. We actually listened to it using Lectio Divina a few weeks ago. I slyly slipped that in there to get you ready for today. Whoa! Look out, stuff's happening all the time. But with things that are familiar to us, we often miss what might be happening under the surface. We just assume that we know it, right? If it's familiar. And I think that's true with John the Baptist and what he is doing here. So I want us to dig into John the Baptist a little bit today to see how this speaks about our Christmas present. So, who is this guy? Who is John? So to ask that question of who someone is, of any biblical person, to ask that question, who they are, they lived in a context where who you are is who you come from. Your family, your ancestry, it determines who you are, it determines what you will do, it determines where you live, what potential that your life has. So if your parents were farmers, then your grandparents must have been farmers too, and then your great-grandparents and back generations. So you can bet when it comes to filling out your career test in high school or college, what are you gonna be when you grow up? You get it back, you have one option. Oh, look, I'm gonna be a farmer. That's it, okay. That is the career path for you. So to get to know John, it is good for us to ask the question, who are John's parents? If we turn a few pages over to Luke's gospel, we do get to know who John's parents are. Do you know who they are? Elizabeth and Zechariah. I'm just going to pretend like you knew that. No, someone's kind of knew it. Yeah, does that sound familiar? Elizabeth and Zechariah? So Luke's gospel, Luke chapter 1, begins by telling us all about Elizabeth and Zechariah, setting up then to get to chapter 2, the whole narrative of Jesus' birth. So in Luke 1, it says this about Elizabeth and Zechariah. So this is what it first says about them. During the rule of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest assigned service in the regiment of Abijah. His name was Zechariah. His wife was descended from the daughters of Aaron. Her name was Elizabeth. Together they lived honorably before God, careful in keeping to the ways of the commandments and enjoying a clear conscience before God. But they were childless because Elizabeth could never conceive, and now they were quite old. So that's where we first meet them, but man, Luke 1 is such a great chapter. So you keep reading and their story unfolds as Elizabeth becomes miraculously pregnant, paralleling Mary's pregnancy with Jesus. And as you may know, Mary and Elizabeth are cousins. So what does that make John and Jesus? First cousins once removed, right? Yep. You know how to work the flow chart, right? Yeah, okay. So yeah, family tree stuff right there. So John the Baptist and Jesus are first cousins once removed. So John's dad, it says in the text, Zechariah, what does he do? What is his job, his vocation? He's a priest, yes. And we may not have picked up on it, but John's mom, Elizabeth, it says that she is descended from the daughters of Aaron, as in Moses' brother, Aaron. So Aaron was a priest also. He was the high priest in the days when the Israelites were on the move through the wilderness from slavery in Egypt to their life in the promised land that God gave them. So both Elizabeth and Zechariah, essentially, they're both priests. That's where John comes from, which is fascinating to consider. as we encounter John here. John's pedigree then is like he's from like the priestliest of priestly families, right? Like all the priests, like it's a big deal. His mother and his father have that heritage. So one way to see this is that John was establishment. John, he comes from organized religion. His parents, they took care of business in the temple. That's what priests do. And certainly an upstanding son of theirs that would give them good credit as parents. He would also be worshiping in the temple, following and upholding the laws of the temple system that the priests were central to. So the temple system was the way in which people practiced their faith, which was a very measurable, rule-following system. You know, you check off the list of laws that you follow, and you're good, you're golden. At this point, there are 627 laws that good, God-fearing Jews adhere to in this temple system. All these laws were how the people, that's how they knew they were okay. That's how they earned forgiveness and righteousness before God. It's even how they knew that they were okay to belong within community as well. So all of this is happening. So hearing all of this, here's what I want us to notice about this text. Understanding John's family background and the temple system, do you get the scandal of this text? Because where is John? Is he in the temple like he's supposed to be? Is he there? No, he's not. He is down by the river. And he's baptizing people, definitely not paying attention to those 627 temple laws, much less being a part of enforcing them. And what is he wearing? It's interesting. How often does the Bible comment on what someone's wearing? Notice that they're wearing a blah, blah, blah. That just doesn't happen. So we know it's there for a point. So he's not, and then it also comments on what he's eating. He's not eating at a 5-star restaurant. He's eating locusts and wild honey, which I looked into, and it's what poor people ate. In other words, Mark is writing this. He goes out of his way to know that John is not dressed like a priest. He's not eating like a priest. He's eating like the people, in fact, those who are in great need. So John completely abandons the temple system as well as his family expectations on him, everything that he is supposed to be and expected to be, and he goes down by the river. This is a scandalous thing that John is doing. We've kind of normalized it. It's it's baptism. That's what we do, right? That's what the church does. No, it doesn't actually at this point do that, right? This is pretty scandalous. And here's why this matters, friends. Because we, like John, we live within the bounds of expectations. This shouldn't be a surprise, but we so often forget that. Like John, there's a certain shape and trajectory that is expected for our lives and the way it is supposed to be for us and who we are supposed to be. And although there are particular nuances based on our own particular families of origin, like where we come from and our own family and heritage, I do think that there's a basic kind of cultural American, what I would call kind of the middle class flow that most of us are told to live. And I think it goes something like this. We'll grow up in a happy, healthy, with no divorce family, with no death in the family, with no death to family members, with parents who are very present and attentive with us. We'll be good at sports, and we'll be good at school too. We'll go to college and we'll meet a great partner. We'll get married after college. We will find a great job. We'll save enough for a down payment. We will have children with no trouble getting pregnant, no miscarriage, no health or developmental issues for our children either. We'll keep moving on up in our job. We'll make and keep great friends. Love and marriage will be easy and fulfilling. Our kids will behave always. There will be no signs of illness, job loss, financial issues, depression, anxiety, divorce, infidelity, addiction, loneliness, broken relationships, or abuse. We'll die at a nice old age in our sleep. Is this not like the story that we were told that this is what our life is going to look like, right? I laid it on a little thick, okay? Maybe it's not quite, okay. But I don't think it's far from what our cultural narrative, the cultural expectation is for our life. John had his, but man, you better believe that we have ours too. And of course, there's more to it than just what I've described. I'm not naming, we have more nuanced expectations that come out of our own unique families and the stories that we're living in. And most of the time, these expectations they're very unconsciously present, sometimes not spoken, but they do peek out sometimes. It comes out in those questions like, so when are you guys going to get married? Or when are you going to start having children? When's that going to happen? My parents, I think of the subtle ways it has happened too in my own life. Like for my parents, they've always been really amazing and supportive about, who I want to be and who I want to become. But I think of how my mom would make comments about what other people were doing and how I would hear that. God, did you hear about Julie? She's not going to college. And you're like, okay, I am supposed to go to college. Like that is pretty clear to me right now, but you can be whoever you want to be. It's like, okay, right, yeah. So it's there, right? Like in those more nuanced ways as well. So all to say, we're swimming in the larger kind of cultural expectations of what our lives should look like, this trajectory that our life should take, including nuances that came from our own families as well. So why do we bring this up now? Because holy cow, who just spent time with their family over Thanksgiving? Anyone? Anyone going to see your family over the next couple of weeks? Maybe at Christmas. Yeah, maybe a little bit of that. So there are so many good gifts to being with our family, right? So many good gifts. There are also so many expectations that we step back into every time that we're together. The system of our family wants us to function in the ways that we always have, fitting into that larger narrative of the expectations and values that our family holds. And again, those expectations aren't inherently bad. Like, it's not bad that my mom wanted me to go to college. That is not a bad thing, right? But that expected trajectory that our family places on us, it may not be the trajectory that God is leading us into, right? I see that here with John. Like, for John to be a priest, to serve God in the temple, I would think that would have been completely aligned with what God would intend for John's life, right? But God had a different plan for him, which may cause us to ask, how did John know? How did he know to do this? I always marvel at this when I read scripture, when I read of these faithful yet flawed human beings in the Bible who did bold things like John. I am just like on a very basic level, I'm amazed that they even knew what to do, like who they were to be. Like John, like how did he know to do this, right? How did he know? Do you ever marvel at that? What becomes so clear when we step into the stories of these folks in the Bible is that in all the ways that their stories are diverse, there's a thread that carries through all of them, that all of their stories, it was so clear that they could all hear God, right? Sometimes it was pretty hard to miss, like an angel saying, go and do this thing. And it's like, oh, that's what you want me to do? Okay, sounds good. It's like, that's pretty obvious, but not always. They were connected to the pulse of God, the heartbeat of God. And there is something to that and how we can better prepare ourselves in light of our family and cultural expectations that we live in. Because these folks in the Bible, also, again, like John, man, they had their own crazy uncle and family values and expectations and the larger cultural narrative of what they should do and who they should be. But they stepped outside of it to become who God invited them to become. And as we draw closer to Bethlehem and Jesus' birth, isn't this what we see in all of the people within the Christmas story? Such scandalous responses, right? Acting outside of what was expected of them. Joseph, who married an already pregnant young woman, nobody does that. Mary, who said yes to being this out of wedlock pregnant teenager. The shepherds who abandoned their posts to go see a baby. The magi who leave everything to travel for months following a star that's in the sky. The Christmas story is a cast of rebels. They became rebels when they became present to the presence of God, in a way that gave them courage to buck the system, to move beyond the expectations, to become who they were designed to be. It's in the presence of God where we too then can remember who we are, and that who we are is not rooted in becoming a farmer or in following the 627 laws or in making it to church or being a nice person, that we do not earn love and approval through meeting the expectations that are placed on us. or in meeting that vision that our father or mother or whatever authority figure has for us. But we are already loved as we are. And from that place, then, it is a wide open field of possibility for what God might invite us into. But probably always to be rebels in some way. So again, my friends, Advent is an intense microcosm of the larger reality of our lives, in that any time of year, on any day, and at any moment, we're almost always somewhere else. Our mind ping-pongs back and forth, from replaying the past to worrying about the future. And you better believe that so much of that inner distraction is wrestling with the expectations that have been placed on us. So my friends, I wonder where this hits you. I wonder, what expectations are you coming up against? From our family, from the wider culture? Where is the rub? Where's that itch? Where's that discomfort that you feel in you for where you are in your life, for how things are? You know, we've all usually got something. Even just like a low-grade grumble of something. Look at where you may have anxiety in regards to this season, when it comes to like thinking about being with certain people or fulfilling certain tasks like you feel like you have to do. Notice places where you have anxiety or discomfort. Pay attention to those places. Look at how it may be a place where God is inviting you to let go of some expectations that might be built into that. For me, I have two brothers, and one of them cut off the relationship with the other, and they have not spoken to each other in 10 years. And that is it is beyond devastating for my family. And there are many layers to how this makes the holidays hard, and I have to keep coming back to places like this in God's story, where I can remember that my life may not line up with the way it's supposed to be. And yet I can still listen for how to live faithfully in that mess of all of it. So where is their mess? In your family? In your life? And what does it look like to listen for God there in that spot? So as we anticipate Christmas shopping with Aunt Sue and sitting down at the table with Grandma and hosting family in our homes or traveling to be with them, and as the questions directly or just the passive-aggressive comments that come, as they come up from our folks, from our people, about all the ways in which our life doesn't look the way it's supposed to, what do you think that we can do to be grounded in the presence of God? What can we do? I think from John, clearly, we show up at Christmas dinner in a camel hair habit tied at the waist with a leather belt. Hello! I think, okay, maybe not. So if that's not an option, here it is. We too can choose to be present to the presence. And last week we named how all the great faith traditions at their best are trying to teach us one thing, and it is to be present in the moment here. Because in the present moment here and now, we were just singing it, this is where God is. Not in our replaying the past, not in worrying about the future, but when we are able to feel our feet on the soil where we stand, we become present to the presence of God. And how do we become more present? Well, that's why we're here every Sunday. I mean, that's what we do. We keep coming back here to be with one another and with God, to bring our messy, lovely, imperfect lives together and into the process of being made whole, being made more present so that we're ready to be loved and to love others well, to be salt for the world. That's what we do. That's why we're here. But then for Advent, what we're doing, we've named 4 practices to help us to be in the midst of a season of so much dew this month. So the 4 practices are then designed to help us listen, to hear who we are, and to know that we can live a different story. So if you missed last week, here they are for the first time. And if you did hear the sermon from last week, then this is just a great time to check in about how the week went. Reality check. To maybe reset some expectations of ourselves as well, to be realistic in our schedule and think about our mindset as we see how we might finesse things differently in the week to come. And always, as we think about these kinds of things, there is grace, there is grace, this is grace, there is grace. This is not another list of 627 things. These are just ways to open us up. So choose to interact with it in the ways that make sense to you. So let's work through our list ways to do Christmas present. So our first practice we named was to power down. No one in the history of humankind has ever had the obstacles that we have to being present, and we willingly carry those obstacles around with us in our pockets. They are our phones, and they are not like inherently awful. I mean, they are amazing things. But we all have different habits regarding our phones and tech. Some of us actually hardly have them with us at all, but some of us have it constantly. So regardless where we fall on that spectrum, pay attention to our habits with our phones and look for ways to be without it. Let it sleep in the other room instead of with us. But just pay attention to that. Did you pay attention to how you were using your phone? Anyone pay attention to some of that this week? A few people? Yeah. I did too, which was really interesting. So please continue to do that. Look for ways to choose to be present in the moment versus kind of distracting with our phones. Second practice, we light candles in Advent, don't we? Yes. Specifically, we light Advent candles, and we want to set folks up to do that at home. Whether you were here last week and made your own Advent log, or if you have your own Advent wreath that you light, or you can just take 4 candles and say, these are my Advent candles right here. It is as simple as that. But we have them, we light them every day, adding another one each Sunday. So all this next week, light 2 of your candles as you sit down at the table, as you're in your living room, however that looks for you. At our house, we lit ours over breakfast most often this week. Dinner was a little too chaotic. We weren't always there, but breakfast, we were lighting those candles. So figure out what works for you. And with those Advent candles we're using, we made a Advent booklet, a little booklet for you. Passed them out last week. Do grab one if you didn't. It's also available online. And in the booklet, it's some information on Advent, if that's still kind of new to you. But also then, it sets us up to do our third practice of presence, which is to savor the story. And each day, we've just mapped out 2 or 3 verses that walk us through Luke's gospel, the story of Jesus' birth, the Christmas story. So just a few sentences every day, holding how just God becoming human and showing up here among us is a pretty amazing thing. And just letting that be carried with us in this busy season, and how that paying attention to how it informs our experience of the present moment too. At our house, again, we read it most days at breakfast, and then sometimes like bedtime snack before heading to bed. Anyone else totally snack up your kids before bed? Man, we do that. Okay, so that was a good moment to review the text. And our daughter June, who's 7, she would read it, she's just loving that. So it's great. Then on Sundays within the booklet, there's a longer piece as you light the new candle for the week. The same reflection and prayer that we are doing here in worship, we've kind of printed that out for you to use at home to kind of revisit and have that kind of reflection question to talk it through if you're sitting around the table with other folks. So use that as well as it walks through the 4 Advent themes of hope, peace, joy, and love. So then the fourth presence practice, fourth and finally, I consider this one the big kahuna, the most important practice. If you do nothing else, do this one. Do number 4, and it is this. It is meditation. In the last few months, meditation has become just a transformative form of prayer for me. I mentioned last week an app that I use, which is funny when I tell you put down your phone, but also use this app. So the app that... Phones can be used for good. The app that I use is called Headspace, which you can also access online at headspace.com. And you may have another way of practicing meditation. There are lots of resources out there. Awesome. In meditation, we're learning to observe our thoughts and our feelings and to experience them, and our bodies too, without judgment, to actually become grounded, to feel where we're sitting, and to just be aware of what's happening. Did anyone do that? Anyone get a chance to meditate this week? Even just one time? A few little hands? Okay, awesome. Awesome. And with the app, you can choose 2, 5, or 10-minute little sessions. And what would that look like for you to set aside time daily? How much more present to yourself, to the magic of the season, to the moment might you become if you made that time? I can't make you do it, but man, I sure commend it to you. As a practice, like Alyssa said, in those quiet moments before the kids wake up or before you get to your day, we just wake up 10 minutes earlier and make that happen. So all 4 of these Advent practices, again, these are not laws to follow. These are doors to walk through of opportunity. And they're all laid out in the Advent booklet. If you want a little bit more about that, just play with them as we practice being present together. So friends, bring to mind again this text from Mark's gospel and the person of John the Baptist, who rebelled against the expectations of his family and culture for the sake of what God was doing. And here in it, as we head into Christmas, that we can do that too. We don't have to live this story that we've been told to live, told by our culture, told by our families. I hear in this such a word of freedom and hope for us to hold as we choose to listen instead, choose to be present to the story that God is inviting us to live. So just as a final note on this text, there's really a powerful message in what John the Baptist carries out in his actions of baptizing down by the river. So in the context, again, of the temple system, this establishment, upper class boy, he's saying, hey, you know what? Doing it that way with the rules and the temple, you're just creating too many obstacles. John appears in the desert and says, you can experience the fullness of God, the forgiveness of sins over here, down here. God is here in the water of the river. You don't have to just do it all at the temple because God is everywhere, which was a complete shift in how God was experienced at that time. John really is setting the stage for Jesus to show up. Jesus' message as he begins to shift the system to be one where God's presence, God's radical love is available everywhere and for everyone. Do you believe that? I sure do. Which is why we're aiming to become more present, to be here. For in the being here now, it opens us up to the story where we are with God everywhere, which means we are everywhere loved. And that's my hope for us this Advent. So as we close our time, we're almost done with our worship service because we've already had communion, so we're good. But we do want to have another experience of practicing presence together, knowing that God meets us in the showing up in the present moment. So today we're going to meditate again using the audio from the Headspace app to kind of normalize for those who weren't here last week to be like, look, this is what it's like to meditate. So this is day 2 of the 10 free days that you can do on the app. Again, there are so many ways to meditate and to pray in this way. And as Jesus followers, the point of it is to become more present to the presence of God. Like that's why we do it. So here's just one way to do it, using this tool that I've enjoyed. So after, we'll keep holding a space to be present into a song to kind of close out our time together in worship, all right? All right, so I invite you to get comfortable. I think Andy, our host, will set us up, but put those feet flat on the floor, get comfortable sitting up straight, but comfortably so, and we'll listen together.